Hello and welcome to The Top Story, the podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, Syria is grappling with a new wave of violence as rebel forces launched a large-scale offensive. US President Joe Biden has pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, who faces sentencing for federal tax and gun convictions. And the Social Democratic Party of Romania is projected to win the most seats in the parliamentary elections. We begin in the Middle East. A new wave of violence has struck Syria as a coalition of rebel groups launched a surprise offensive in the western countryside of Aleppo last week, sweeping into parts of the northwestern Syrian province for the first time in 80 years. The rebels captured key territories in Aleppo and Idlib provinces and advanced in Hama, taking control of multiple towns and villages in the central province. Syrian government forces launched a counter-offensive in the northern countryside of Hama on Sunday, reclaiming key areas from the rebel groups. Army Chief General Abdul Karim Mahmoud Ibrahim conducted a field tour in the province, meeting with army members.
This is our land, our honor, and our dignity. But anyone who is a mercenary or acting outside the law and tries to open fire will be dealt with on the spot.
Haidar Kaswini has more details from Syria.
The war is back to square one, with scenes forgotten by the people of Aleppo for 8 years after a relative calm that governed the city as a result of understanding between Russia, Iran, and Turkey. The understanding now seems to have collapsed. In a surprise attack, a broad coalition of armed opposition groups headed by HTS, which is listed as a terrorist organization by the U.S. Department of State, launched an attack on the west of Aleppo, taking over villages and strategic routes before reaching the provincial city of Aleppo and taking complete control of it.
The 1,000 militants who participated in the offensive and the equipment used all signal there's involvement by international and regional actors in the city of Aleppo. What's happening there is the control of a city by global terrorism.
The Syrian military announced earlier that its forces are regrouping on the outskirts of the city, saying its troops are forming a defense line and preparing for counter-offensive to regain the capital of northern Syria. Aleppo is seen as the economic capital of Syria, but with many of its people working in business and the influx of opposition groups flooding into their city, and the government vowed to retake it. Thousands of civilians have decided to leave by seeking safety, as the war could ramp up at any moment.
The scenes are appalling. Everyone is trying to leave. And those who are still there, they do not have gasoline for their cars to get them to a safe area. Thousands of people are leaving. It's an entire city, and this is what is happening right now.
The offensive came as Iran-linked groups, primarily Lebanon's Hezbollah, which has backed Syrian government forces since 2015, have been preoccupied with their own battles at home. A ceasefire in Hezbollah's 2-month war with Israel took effect Wednesday, the day Syrian opposition groups announced their offensive. Israel has also escalated its attacks against Hezbollah and Iran-linked targets in Syria over the last 70 days, paralyzing the mobility of the Syrian troops across Syria.
I hope the city will be regained by any means. I believe the experience accumulated by the Syrian military will likely enable it to regain the city with few losses to the lives of innocent civilians or to their property.
A curfew was imposed on the city of Aleppo by insurgents starting from 5 p.m. to 7 a.m. daily, with basic items now growing scarce in the market. It is a status quo that could accelerate the counter-offensive by the Syrian military, which has been mobilizing its troops for 2 days. The loss of Aleppo marks a crucial moment in the 14-year-long Syrian conflict. It also marks the end of the security and the political understanding between the major foreign countries involved in Syria, an understanding that kept Syria conflict dormant for 4 years and is now falling apart.
That was Haidar Kaswini reporting from Damascus. Elsewhere in the Middle East, thousands of people have taken to the streets across Israel to demand that the government reach a hostage release deal with Hamas. This comes after Hamas released a video of an American Israeli hostage on the weekend who was pleading for the freedom of all hostages remaining in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has promised to take every action possible to bring the hostages home. Sarah Coates has more from Tel Aviv.
This video release has really seen an outpouring of emotion, an outpouring of grief right across Israel. It's a fairly difficult video to watch. It's a young 20-year-old man pleading for his life, pleading for lives of other hostages being held in the Gaza Strip, and pleading with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to strike a deal with Hamas. Now, this video release really saw thousands of people take to the streets right across Israel, a very large demonstration here in Tel Aviv overnight. People attending this rally were really calling on Benjamin Netanyahu to do a deal, do it now, saying that really the time is right, it's enough. These people need to come home. Here is what one of those people had to say.
The video has shaken me and my family. While it gives us hope, it also shows how difficult the situation is for Idan and the other hostages, and how desperately they are crying out for us to rescue them.
A recent poll here in Israel really does show overwhelming support for a deal. 71% of people want this to happen, compared to just 15% who do not, and 14% who say they don't know. With intelligence that has been gathered by the United States and also Israel, suggesting that only half of these 101 hostages being held in the Strip are still alive.
That was Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. In North America, US President Joe Biden has pardoned his son Hunter Biden. The move reversed his earlier stance of not using executive power to pardon or reduce his son's sentence. Hunter Biden was convicted in June for purchasing a firearm in 2018 while addicted to crack cocaine, marking the first time a sitting president's child has been convicted of a crime. He's set to be sentenced next week. Hunter Biden was also scheduled to be sentenced in 2 weeks for federal tax evasion charges, to which he pleaded guilty in September. Edis Tianshan has more.
It's receiving quite a bit of reactions, not just because of a reversal of the decision of President Joe Biden, but also the timing of this decision. Now, since these convictions came earlier this year, around June, President Biden has always been very clear about not using his pardoning power as a president for his family members. Repeatedly, both him and his wife, First Lady Jill Biden, who has also spoken about these on interviews back in June, for example, where she said, both Joe and I respect the judicial system, and that's the bottom line. So they've been very clear about their position on this, but that obviously has reversed now. And then not just the decision itself, the reversal, but as I mentioned, the timing is quite critical, because if Biden wanted to use these powers, he could have done so throughout the summer. But many people are reacting to this, and they're saying that would have caused a political backfire back then when he was still campaigning for president. And even later when he dropped out of the race, this could still be used against the Democratic Party. So many people are sort of questioning the timing of this decision, which came weeks after the election itself.
That is Edis Tianshan reporting. Turning to Europe, the Social Democratic Party of Romania has projected to win the most seats in the parliamentary elections. It is one of the parties forming the ruling coalition. Over 8,000 candidates competed for more than 330 seats in the Chamber of Deputies and over 130 in the Senate. Alyosha Milenkovic has more.
As the first exit polls were announced on Sunday evening, it was clear there will be no clear winner. A coalition government appears unavoidable, just as it has been over the past 4 years. The biggest question is who will create it and in which direction the new government will lean. According to exit polls, the winner by number of votes is the ruling PSD, the Social Democrats Party of incumbent Prime Minister Marcel Ciolacu. With 26% of the votes, it is followed by the right-wing Our Party with 19%. PNL and USR have about 15.5% each, and far-right SOS Romania took 5.5%. With that type of vote dispersion, none of the parties looks able to play the role of a kingmaker. So both the political left and political right would need to sit at the table and try to create a new coalition government. The exit polls show results that appear a bit different than people here expected after the first round of presidential elections, when the hard-right candidate Calin Gorgescu won most of the votes. The ruling PSD's gamble with the election dates seems to have given them some results. Voter turnout was almost the same as for the presidential election last Sunday, just over 52%, and it was way higher than at the parliamentary election in 2020 and 2016, when it was just over 30%. Official results of the election are expected by Monday noon, local time.
That was Alyosha Milinkovic on the parliamentary elections in Romania. On Africa, starting Sunday, December the 1st, products from 33 of the least developed countries on the continent are set to benefit from China's new zero-tariff waiver on goods. The new directive is expected to have a significant impact on African businesses eyeing Chinese markets. Robert Nagile reports from Nairobi.
Beginning 1st December, China will grant duty-free access to 100% of the products from 33 of the least developed countries across Africa that have relations with China. This follows a commitment made by President Xi Jinping in September at the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit held in Beijing. Now, what this means, it will significantly lower the cost on African imports into China. It will also provide this expansive Chinese market for African products and make those products more competitive. However, this also targets another area. China is Africa's largest trading partner. In 2023 alone, trade between China and Africa stood at $282 billion. That's a 1.5% increase from the previous year. However, despite the fact that trade volumes between China and Africa have been growing significantly over the past decade, there still is a niggling issue that needs to be sorted out, and that is trade imbalances. And this is what this intends to do. It's providing African products access to a huge, expansive Chinese market. African businesses have known for a while that this was going to happen. The prospect of duty-free access for their products into Chinese markets is exciting for them. Eventually, it is hoped this will lead to expansion of their businesses and job creation. For African governments, the strengthening of economic partnerships with Africa's largest trading partner, that is China.
That was Robert Nagile reporting from the Kenyan capital. Finally, global talks on curbing plastic pollution have broken down, with negotiators falling short of their commitment to establishing a landmark treaty. More than 170 countries attended the UN meeting in South Korea. Popin Putin has more.
The talks in Busan, South Korea, to tackle the global plastic pollution problem spanned nearly a week. More than 6 countries, along with environmental groups, called for an enforceable treaty that would limit plastic production and ban some chemicals from everyday products. But other oil-producing and developing countries pushed back, arguing that limiting plastic production would negatively impact economic progress. A record 220 lobbyists representing fossil fuel and chemical industry interests attended the talks, according to environmental watchdog Centre for International Environmental Law.
While it is encouraging that portions of the text have been agreed upon, we must also recognize that a few critical issues still prevent us from reaching a comprehensive agreement. These unresolved issues remain challenging, and additional time will be needed to address them effectively.
The Busan talks were the result of 2 years of negotiations on plastics. In 2022, the UN Environment Assembly pledged to create a binding treaty by 2024. Under UN rules, delegates must reach a consensus to pass a binding deal. Negotiators said they hope to resume talks next year.
We are unfortunately seeing a consensus culture stopping us from getting a meaningful treaty. there are all these concessions being made. The discussions become more and more complex.
Each year, the world produces more than 450 million metric tons of plastic, mostly from fossil fuels, and generates 350 million metric tons of plastic waste. Around half that waste is dumped into landfills. About 25% is mismanaged, often leaking into rivers and oceans. Another 19% is incinerated, and less than 10% is recycled. Unlike other materials, plastic does not biodegrade. It can take up to 1,000 years to break down. Plastic pollution chokes marine wildlife, damages soil, and poisons groundwater. Without policy changes, it's projected that plastic production could climb about 70% by 2040.
That was Popin Putin reporting. Now recapping the headlines, Syria is grappling with a new wave of violence as rebel forces launch a large-scale offensive. US President Joe Biden has pardoned his son Hunter Biden, who faces sentencing for federal tax and gun convictions. And the Social Democratic Party of Romania is projected to win the most seats in the parliamentary elections. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thanks for listening.